Everybody in Ash Springs knew Wade Coburn as the man who said no. No to the church supper. No to the cattlemen's board. No to the widow Pearl when she brought him pie 3 winters running. He'd buried his wife and something else besides, and after that he shut the door on the world and let the wind do his talking. So when the whole town gathered on a Tuesday afternoon to decide what to do with a half-starved Apache girl nobody wanted, a child the reservation agent was ready to load onto a wagon like a sack of feed, not one soul turned to look at Wade. Why would they? A man like that doesn't take in a stranger's grief. But I was standing close enough to see his hands, and I'm telling you, before he ever opened his mouth, I saw his hands start to shake. What he said next was 4 words long. 4 words, that's all. And I have lived 71 years on this hard earth, buried a wife and a boy of my own, and I have never, not once before or since, watched 4 small words take a whole town by the throat and make grown men look at the ground so nobody'd see them cry. Stay with me, let me tell you how it happened. Let me tell you about the day the cold man said yes. I keep a watch in my vest pocket that doesn't run. It was my Martha's, her father's before that, and the mainspring snapped the same March she passed, which I've never been fool enough to think was an accident of God. I wind it anyway, every morning. 3 turns, no more, listening to that dry little click that goes nowhere. Folks in Ash Springs think it's grief made me simple. Let them. A man past 70 is allowed one foolishness, and mine keeps my hands busy so they don't do worse. I was winding it that Tuesday, standing under the awning of my own smithy, when the agency wagon came grinding up Front Street, and everything in this story started to go wrong. The sun was the color of a scald that afternoon. We hadn't seen rain since the last of April, and it was near September now, the whole valley gone the brown of an old scab, cattle showing rib, tempers showing worse. When men are afraid of the sky they get mean, and Ash Springs had been mean a good long while. The wagon belonged to Silas Petch, the Indian agent out of the San Carlos allotment, and I disliked the man the way you dislike a smell you can't place. He drove with his elbows and his chin up like the road ought to thank him. Beside him on the bench sat a woman from the mission, Mrs. Alderton, all bones and bonnet, hands folded like she was already praying over somebody. And in the wagon bed, wedged between a water barrel and a coil of chain, sat the girl. I want to describe her right, because the town got her wrong that day, and I'll not add to it. She was small, 7 years, maybe 8, you couldn't tell for the hunger on her. Her dress was mission cotton, gray, too big, cinched with a rope. Somebody had cut her hair short, unevenly, the way you shear a thing you mean to be done with, and she held herself in the wagon bed, the way a rabbit holds itself in the open, not moving, because moving is what gets you seen and being seen is what gets you killed. She had one hand closed around something. I couldn't see what. She kept it against her chest the whole time. She did not cry. I noted that. In all the hours that followed through all of it, that child never once cried where a soul could see her, and I've thought since that it was the most heartbreaking thing about her. A child that young who's already learned tears cost more than they buy. Petch reined up in front of the church and stood in the wagon like he was fixing to give a sermon. "Folks of Ash Springs," he called out, and by then a crowd was gathering. "There's nothing draws a dry town like the promise of somebody else's trouble. I'll be brief. This here's the situation the good Lord and the United States government have handed us." He explained it the way men like him explain things, which is to say he made a hard thing sound like paperwork. The girl was Chiricahua. Her band had been broke up in the spring troubles. I'll not go into all that here. It's a longer and uglier story than mine, and most of it the army would rather nobody told. Her mother had died on the walk to the allotment. Sickness, Petch said, in the flat way a man says it when he means the sickness of being marched 100 miles in the wrong season. Her father, he didn't say. When a man doesn't say, you know. She had no people left that the agency could find. No band, no aunt, no grandmother, or none they'd trouble to look for. And the boarding school back east, the one they shipped the orphan ones to, wasn't taking new children till the spring term. Which leaves the question, Petch said, of where she keeps between now and then. The mission's full up. I can't carry her back and forth 300 miles. And frankly, here he smiled, and I have wanted to knock that smile down a man's throat for near 30 years now, I'd think a Christian community might see it as an opportunity. To do some good, take her in. Feed her, work her a little, keep her out of trouble till the school opens up. Silence. You've never heard a silence like a town not volunteering. I looked around at faces I'd known my whole life. Harlan Voss, who ran the mercantile, found something fascinating in his own boots. Pastor Ellery cleared his throat twice and said nothing both times. The Cudahy women drew their skirts a half-inch closer, like the child was a spill that might spread. Somebody at the back, I never learned who, and it's a mercy because I'd have hated him, said low, "We didn't lose no cattle to Coburn's stray. Let the fort keep it." He said it. And still the girl didn't move. But I saw her eyes go across the crowd, quick, reading us, and I understood she knew exactly what was being said even if she hadn't the English for the words. Cruelty has a shape you can see from a wagon bed. She'd seen plenty. Mrs. Alderton spoke up then, thin and desperate. "She's a good girl, quiet. She learns fast, she's already got some of her letters and she can." "Nobody's saying she ain't a good girl," Harlan cut in that reasonable voice men used to be terrible politely. "It's just we got our own to feed this year, Petch. Look at that sky. I got 4 mouths and a well going low. It ain't Christian to take on what you can't carry." Murmurs, agreement, the awful safe warmth of a crowd agreeing to do nothing. I'll tell you true, I near stepped forward myself. I'm ashamed I had to think about it. An old man with a cold forge and a cold house and no wife to ask, what business had I raising a child? What did I know of little girls? Martha and I had a boy, and I lost them both, and the not knowing what to do with a daughter felt like one more grief I hadn't the strength to carry. That's the honest coward's arithmetic that went through my head. I counted my reasons and I stood still. And that's when Petch, out of pure meanness or pure boredom, decided to have his fun. He'd caught sight of Wade Coburn. Wade was standing off at the edge of it all by the rail in front of the feed store, the way he always stood apart, a little turned away, like a man reading whether nobody else could feel. He'd come to town for wire and salt, that's all. He hadn't meant to be part of anything. Wade Coburn hadn't meant to be part of anything in 9 years. You have to understand what the town thought of Wade, or the rest of this makes no sense. 9 years back, Wade Coburn came out from Texas with a young wife named Ada and a little daughter, and he built the Coburn place up on the bench land north of the Springs. Good grass then, before the dry years. And I'll not lay it all out here because some of it's Wade's and not mine to spend, but there was a fire, and there was a fever the same hard winter, and Wade came down out of that country in the spring alone. Buried 2 crosses up on the bench where you can see them from the road. And after that the man just closed. He worked. He paid his debts to the day. He never raised his voice and never lowered his guard and never, in 9 years, let a living soul pass the fence of himself. Said no to everything. No to friendship, no to the church, no to the widow Pearl and her pies, no to me the one time I rode up half-drunk on Martha's death day wanting company off a man I figured understood loss. He gave me coffee, that once, black and silent, and then he stood up to signal I should go, and I went. That was the closest Wade Coburn came to kindness in 9 years, and it near broke my heart it was so little and so much. So the town looked at Wade the way you look at a locked house. Cold, done, a man who'd used up all his yes and had only no left. And Petch, grinning, called across the whole crowd, "What about you, Coburn? You got all that land and nobody on it. Reckon you could use a hand." He laughed, and a few laughed with him, and the cruelty of it was that everyone understood the joke. The joke was that of course Wade Coburn would say no. Wade Coburn said no to warm bread. Asking Wade to take a child was like asking a stone to take a candle. It was funny because it was impossible. Or is that too much Christian charity for the likes of you? I watched Wade's face. Nothing moved in it. That was Wade, a face like a shut door. But I was close, closer than Petch, close enough to see down to his hands where they rested on the hitch rail. And I saw them go white at the knuckle. I saw the tendon stand up. I saw his hands begin, very slightly, to shake. Nobody else saw. They were all still chuckling at Petch's joke, waiting for the flat no that would let them off the hook, that would prove the town right, that would let everybody go home and not think about the child in the wagon. Wade Coburn wasn't looking at Petch. That's the thing I've never forgotten. He wasn't looking at the man who asked, or the crowd that laughed, or the empty distance he usually stared into. He was looking at the girl. And the girl, for the first time that whole terrible afternoon, was looking back at him. Just the two of them across all that dust and meanness, a broken man and a broken child, seeing each other. I don't know what she saw in that closed face. Something the rest of us couldn't. Children read us truer than we like. Maybe she saw the two crosses up on the bench without ever having heard of them. Maybe she just saw a man who wasn't laughing. She opened her hand. Just a little, just enough that I caught what she'd been holding all that time, the thing she'd clutched from the wagon to the church to the auction of her own small life. It was a horse, a little carved horse, wood, no bigger than her thumb, worn pale where a hand had held it. Somebody had made it for her once, somebody who was dead now. It was the whole of what she had left of being loved, and she held it up not to the crowd, not to Petch, she held it up to Wade, the only person there who'd looked at her like a person, the way a child offers you the most precious thing she owns because she doesn't yet know that grown-ups are the ones who take. And Wade Coburn made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the sound a man makes when something that's been frozen 9 years cracks all at once deep, where the cold gets in. I heard it and my own eyes stung, and I gripped that dead watch in my pocket so hard the crown bit my palm. The laughter died. People felt it before they understood it, that the joke had gone somewhere they hadn't meant it to go. Wade let go of the rail. He crossed that dusty street slow, boots loud in the quiet, and every eye followed him, and Petch's grin faltered because a joke isn't funny once the stone starts moving. Wade walked right up to the wagon. He didn't look at the agent. He didn't look at the crowd. He put one hand on the wagon side, and he looked up at that little girl holding out her wooden horse, and I swear the whole of Ash Springs held its breath. The girl didn't flinch. She'd flinched at all of us. She didn't flinch at him. And Wade Coburn, the man who said no, the locked house, the used-up stone, reached up and closed his rough hand very gently over her small one, over the little horse, folding her fingers safe around it like it was the most valuable thing in the territory. His voice, when it came, was wrecked and low, and I had to lean to hear it. But the whole street heard it, because the whole street had gone still as a held breath. 4 words. I'll take her home. There's a thing nobody tells you about a miracle, which is that the morning after, you still have to make breakfast. I know because I was there for the morning after. I invited myself. Wade had no more idea what to do with a little girl than I had what to do with a herd of geese, and while I'll not pretend I was much help, I couldn't stay away. Call it curiosity. Call it an old man wanting to stand near a warm thing on a cold stretch of his life. I rode up to the Coburn place at first light with a sack of Mrs. Voss's day-old bread that Harlan gave me for free. Harlan gave it for free, and wouldn't meet my eye when he did it. And that's a whole other story about shame doing its slow work in a small town. The Coburn house sat up on the bench where the grass used to be good. I'd not been up there since the Coffee and Silence day years back. It was a hard-used place but a sound one, everything mended, nothing pretty, the house of a man who kept busy so he wouldn't have to sit still. And out front from the road you could see the 2 crosses. White, weathered, a big one and a small one. He kept the weeds off them. 9 years and he kept the weeds off them. I found him in the yard splitting wood he didn't need split, which is what a man does when there's a feeling in the house too big to sit inside with. "She sleep?" I asked. "Some." He didn't stop the axe. Wouldn't take the bed, slept in the corner on the floor. Thunk. Wedged herself between the wall and the trunk where she could see the door. Thunk. He set the axe down then and stood there breathing, and he said, so quiet I nearly missed it, "Ada used to sleep like that when she was a girl, before I knew her. Her people'd been through their own hard time. She told me once she never in her life slept easy till she slept next to me." He picked the axe back up. "I couldn't do that for her in the end. Could I keep her easy?" I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything. I just stood in his yard and let him not be alone while he said it, which is the only gift I've ever been much good at. The girl watched us from the doorway. She'd come out silent as smoke, and I don't know how long she'd been there. Still had the little horse in her fist. Still wore the gray mission dress. And she was watching Wade split wood with an expression I couldn't read at first, and then I could, and it near unmanned me. She was watching him the way you watch a fire you're not sure will let you close, wanting the warmth, braced for the burn. Here's the truth of those first weeks, and I'll not prettify it, because the pretty version is a lie, and the child deserved better than a lie. It was hard, it was awful and clumsy and slow. She wouldn't eat in front of us at first. She'd take food and hide it in her sleeve under the porch, in a hole she dug behind the barn like a dog stashing against a winter. She'd learned to always expect. Wade found a cache once gone bad, and I watched him understand what it meant, that she'd been hungry so long and so deep that trust was a thing her body couldn't yet afford. And he went out to the barn and stood a long time with his forehead against a post before he came back in and set out more food and said nothing about the hole. She had nightmares, woke screaming in a language none of us spoke, screaming for people who weren't coming. The first time, Wade near broke down the wall getting to her, and when he reached for her she fought him, bit him, drew blood, because in the dark a man's hands are a man's hands, and hers was a history I'll not spell out but you can guess at. And God forgive the world for what it teaches children to expect in the dark. He didn't grab her again after that. He learned. He sat on the floor an arm's length off in the dark, and he didn't touch her, and he sang. Wade Coburn, who hadn't spoke a soft word in 9 years. I heard him through the window. I'll admit I was listening, sang low and tuneless, some old thing, and I realized it was a song his Ada must have sung, because he stumbled on words like they hurt going out. He sang and he didn't touch her, and slowly, over an hour, over many nights, the screaming would gentle to crying, and the crying to breathing, and the breathing to sleep. And some mornings I'd come up and find them both asleep on that floor, an arm's length apart, the closest two wounded creatures could stand to be. And it was the most tender and most sorrowful thing I ever saw, and I've seen my share. The town, meanwhile, did what towns do. Not all of them. I want that on the record. The widow Pearl sent up a bundle of proper clothes cut down to size, no note, and when I thanked her for Wade she said sharp, "I didn't do it for Wade Coburn," and shut her door, and I understood she'd done it for a little girl and would rather die than be thanked. There's grace in this world, but it's shy, and it comes in through the side door. But there were the others. Harlan, I've mentioned, came around slow, but plenty didn't. There was talk. There's always talk. That it wasn't natural. That a white man raising an Apache child was asking for trouble, was an insult to the folks who'd lost stock and kin in the troubles, was, and this one I heard with my own ears and had to walk away before I did something a man my age oughtn't, bad for property values, having an Indian on the bench. And Petch didn't like it either, though for the life of me I couldn't see why he'd care, till later I understood. A man like Petch needs the world to be as cold as he is. A man like Petch cannot abide the sight of somebody proving him wrong about human nature. Wade taking that girl in was a personal affront to everything Silas Petch had decided about people, and men like that don't forgive being made a liar of. He rode off that first day with a look I should have paid more mind. Now here's the heavy part, the part I've turned over more nights than I've slept easy. About 3 weeks in, the girl ran. We'd had a good day, the first good day. She'd eaten at the table, actually sat, actually ate, and near the end of the meal she'd looked up at Wade and said her first English word to him, which was more, and Wade had got up fast and gone to the stove so we wouldn't see his face, and served her more with his back to us and his shoulders shaking. A good day. And that night she ran. I think I've thought about it long. I think it was because it was a good day. I think the wanting scared her worse than the hurting ever did. She'd learned that everything she loved got taken, her mother, her father, her people, her whole world, and here she'd gone and started to love a wood-splitting man on a dry bench, and her small heart couldn't bear to stand still and wait for it to be ripped away. So she'd tear it away herself first, run before she could be left. I've known grown men to wreck a good thing for the same reason. I've come near to it myself. Wade woke to the open door and the cold corner, and he came pounding on my door. I was staying down in the bunkhouse by then, another thing we didn't discuss, and his face His face was the face of a man watching the fire start all over again, watching the fever come back. 9 years of no, and he'd finally said one yes, and here it was walking out into the dark to die on him like everything else he'd ever loved. We searched all night. It came on to storm, the first weather in months, and wouldn't you know it, the sky that wouldn't rain for a dying town opened up the one night a child was lost in it. Cold rain, hard, arroyos filling. And Wade rode like a crazy man, calling a name he couldn't pronounce right, calling the mission name and her real name both, calling into the black. We found her near dawn. She'd got maybe 4 miles, which is a long way for small legs, headed, and this is the part that finished me, headed north, toward nothing. Toward the mountains. Toward, Wade understood before I did, the country her people had come from. She was trying to go home. To a home that didn't exist anymore, to people in the ground, because it was the only home her heart had a map to. She'd fallen in a wash, turned an ankle, soaked through, shaking so hard I heard her teeth. And when Wade climbed down to her, she did the thing that I will carry to my own grave. She put her hands up to fend him off, and she said in English, the second and third English sentences I ever heard her speak, she said, "You don't have to keep me. I'll go. You don't have to keep me." She'd worked it out, see. In her 7-year-old arithmetic, she'd decided she was a burden, a thing that got a man's cattle killed and his town turned against him, and she was setting him free. Running so he wouldn't have to carry her, giving him back his no. It was the most selfless and most broken thing I ever heard out of a human mouth, and it came out of a child in a ditch in the rain. And Wade Coburn knelt down in that cold water, and he made the emotionally heavy choice that this whole story turns on because he could have. He could have said all right. Part of him, the scared 9 years locked part, must have wanted to, the way you want to put down a weight before it breaks you. Loving her would cost him, might cost him the same grief twice. Every reason he'd shut the door in the first place was standing right there in the rain saying, "Let me go. You don't have to." He gathered her up out of that wash, held her against his chest, her fighting weak and then not fighting, and he said into her wet hair, fierce, wrecked, the way you swear an oath, "I know I don't have to," a long breath, "I get to." And he carried her home up the bench road in the rain, and she stopped fighting somewhere along the way and held on to his coat with both fists, the little horse pressed between them, and I rode behind them the whole way with rain and something else running down my face, and I did not care who saw. The rain that found her that night didn't stop. It broke the drought. 3 days it came down, gentle after the first fury, soaking into ground so long dry it drank like a drunk, and the arroyos ran and the wells came up and the brown valley went, over about 2 weeks, an impossible tender green. The town that had no charity to spare a child because of a dry sky suddenly had a wet one, and grass, and calves that live, and I noticed, I'm an old man, I notice that a fed town is a kinder town. Some of the same folks who'd found their boots so interesting at the church that day found reason to ride up the bench road with a ham, a bolt of cloth, a sack of seed. Guilt does its slow work. It comes in the side door same as grace, and sometimes you can't tell the two apart. And I've decided in my old age that maybe it doesn't matter which one gets a child fed. The girl mended, ankle first and then the deeper thing slower. She started sleeping in the bed. Small victory, Wade told me about it like a man reporting a war one. Then she started sleeping through. Then one morning I came up and she was in the yard humming, tuneless, the way Wade hummed, having caught it off him like you catch a way of walking off your father, and Wade was standing in the doorway watching her with a look on his face I hadn't seen a man wear in a long time, and I knew better than to say a word about it. She learned her English fast, like Mrs. Alderton promised, learned to call the horses, learned to help Wade at the forge. He'd taken up some smithing to bring in cash, and I'd ride up and teach the two of them together, the child pumping the bellows with her whole small body, deadly serious, and the two of us grown men careful not to laugh at how serious, because we understood it. She needed to be useful, needed to earn her place because the world had taught her nothing came free. It'd be years I'd not lived to see all of it before she'd learn she didn't have to earn love, but she was learning. You could watch it happen, slow as the grass. She told Wade her name proper one evening, made him say it till he said it right. I won't spell it here because I never could spell it and I'd get it wrong and she deserves it got right. Her name was hers, and Wade held it careful as he held everything of hers. He called her by it. Never called her Ruth, the mission name, not once. Some men would have made her over into something easier to explain to the neighbors. Wade never asked her to be anybody but who she was, which is the rarest kind of love there is, the kind that doesn't need you to be convenient. I thought that was the end of it. A hard thing turned tender, a locked house opened, an old fool like me warmed by another man's fire. I thought we were done with trouble. Then Petch came back. It was October. He came up the bench road in a buggy with a second man beside him, a pinch-faced clerk with a leather case, and I was there, thank God I was there, mending a hinge when they pulled into the yard. And Petch got down with that smile, that same church day smile, and he had papers. "Coburn," he said, "been meaning to get up here." The school back east had a spring opening after all, he said, and there'd been a review, he said, of the placement. And it turned out he was enjoying this. You could see the enjoyment on him like grease. It turned out the agency had never properly authorized a permanent placement with a single man, unmarried, no woman in the home, no church affiliation. Irregular, he called it, against policy. The child was a ward of the government, and the government, in its wisdom, had decided her best interests were served by the institution. Come spring, he'd be up to collect her. I have hated men in my life. I hated Silas Petch in that yard more than I have hated anything, because I understood at last that this was never about policy or the girl's good. This was a small, mean man who'd been made a liar of. Wade Coburn had proven up here on this bench that a cold world could turn warm, that a stone could hold a candle, that the worst of what happens to us doesn't have to be the last word, and Silas Petch could not stand it. He'd rather send a healed child back into hell than let her stand as proof that mercy was possible. There are people like that watch for them. They smile. Wade read the papers, read them twice slow because Wade did nothing fast. And the girl came to the doorway she always knew. She always read the shape of trouble faster than any of us, and she saw Petch, and I watched her go still. That old wagon bed stillness, rabbit in the open, all the weeks of thaw gone in a breath, and she was back to the child who'd learned that everything gets taken. And here's where I thought Wade would break, or fight. I half wanted him to fight. I'd have fought beside him, old as I am. I thought he'd throw Petch off the land. And Petch wanted that too, I think. Wanted Wade to give him a reason, an assault, a threat, something to write in his leather case. Wade did neither. He folded the papers, handed them back. And he said, calm as still water, "You'll want to talk to my wife about all that." Petch blinked. You don't have a wife, Coburn." "Don't I?" Wade said, not a question. And then Wade Coburn did the second thing in this story that took me by the throat. He looked at the widow Pearl's cut-down clothes drying on the line. She still sent things, that woman still wouldn't be thanked, and he said to Petch, "Easy, Pearl and I are to be married Sunday. Pastor Ellery's got the bands, church, a woman in the home, all regular." He let that sit. "You come back in the spring, you'll find a married man, a Christian home, and a wife who was schoolteacher back in Missouri before she was widowed. You want to explain to your review why you're pulling a child out of a schoolteacher's home to ship her 300 miles to strangers. You go right ahead and write it up. I'll want a copy. Sold the newspaper down in Tucson. I know the editor." He didn't, or maybe he did by then. Wade had been coming down off his bench back into the world all autumn. "Good day, Petch." Now I didn't know if a word of it was true. I found out later most of it wasn't yet. Wade rode down that very evening to the widow Pearl's, hat literally in his hand, and I would give 10 years I don't have to have seen that conversation. Whatever passed between them, Pearl Coburn, she'd not let anyone call her that for near a year, out of stubbornness and pride, but she got there. Pearl married Wade that Sunday. And I'll tell you my own belief, which is that it started as a shield for a child and turned into something neither of those two lonely wrecked people expected, because I stood up as witness at that wedding, and I saw how she looked at the girl, and how the girl, careful, testing, reached up and took Pearl's hand, and how Wade watched the both of them with his shut-door face finally open. Petch came back in the spring, found exactly what Wade said he'd find, wrote nothing in his leather case, rode off, and I never saw him again, and I've spent no grief on that. I'm an old man now telling this from the far end of it. I'll not live a great deal longer, and I'm at peace with the arithmetic. I've buried more than I've kept. But before I go, I wanted to set this down straight, because the town got it wrong that first day, and I'll not let the wrong version be the one that lasts. The girl grew up on that bench, grew up green years and dry ones both, grew up with a father who split wood he didn't need to split, and a mother who'd not be thanked, and an old fool of a not-quite grandfather who taught her the forge and wound a dead watch every morning to keep his hands from doing worse. She grew up knowing her own name, said right. She grew up. That's the whole of the miracle when you get down to it, not that she was saved, but that she got to grow up, ordinary, loved, in a place where somebody kept the weeds off what mattered. I go up the bench road still, when my knees allow. There's 3 crosses up there now. I put the 3rd one there myself, small, for Martha's watch, which I finally let stop and buried, because a man can only wind a dead thing so long before he ought to let it rest and go warm his hands at a living fire instead. The girl helped me dig. She's near grown now. She still has the little wooden horse, keeps it on the mantel where a body can see it. I asked her once, I was maudlin, I'm allowed, I asked her what she saw that first day in the wagon that made her hold her horse up to the coldest man in the county. What made her pick him? She thought about it a long while. She's a thinker, that one always was. He wasn't laughing, she said, and his hands were shaking, same as mine. I've turned that over ever since. 2 shaking hands across a dusty street. That's the whole of it, maybe. That's how the ones who have been broke find each other, not by the strong parts but by the parts that shake. I don't have a tidy ending for you. I've come to distrust tidy endings. The world doesn't hand them out, and a man my age has stopped pretending. I'll just tell you that on green evenings up on that bench, when the light goes gold and the wood smoke lifts, and I can hear a girl and her father humming the same tuneless song, an old thing, a dead woman's song made living again. I sit on Wade Coburn's porch, the man who said no, and I watch the family that 4 words made, and I think about how the whole town expected.